Hi everybody, welcome to another edition of Fireside Chats, where we talk about all the most exciting campus civil liberties news for the week. And if you are a frequent viewer of Fireside Chats, you're a Fireside Chats fan, or you're just joining us for the first time, you've picked a good week because this week we have released Fire's list of the 2018 worst colleges for free speech. Public, private, we hit them all, and we're gonna get into all the very bad, gory details soon. So stay tuned. Everybody loves that, right? Joining me are my esteemed colleagues, Senior Program Officer Adam Steinbaugh, Senior Program Officer Sarah McLaughlin, and Director of Litigation, Marieke Tuthill Beck-Coon. I think I got all those names in there. Did I do
There, I can add a couple more.
We could add whatever,
like
free
a law
speech,
firm,
right? So let's talk about, let's just get right into the list. Let's start with Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. Adam, why don't you tell us why they made our list? And the list is in no particular order, by the way, although, I forgot to mention, this year we do have something new. This year the list goes up to 11 because we have our first ever Lifetime Censorship award that we are giving out. So again, stay tuned to find out why this one goes up to 11. But we'll start with the regular list, RPI.
Well, RPI is, the list is in no particular order, but, if we're leading off with this one because this has been a saga. And it's the type of saga where it is hard to find anyone who would disagree with or who would find the reasons for the censorship here to be justifiable unless you're an administrator at RPI.
And this is multiple levels of censorship going on for a long
They are
time.
checking off every box on the list. So at RPI, students are engaged in this long-running dispute with the administration about control of the Rensselaer Student Union, which is a building and an organization that facilitates student organizations and gives students a place to talk and to have meals and that sort of thing. It's just this building in the middle of campus. And for over 100 years, it's been controlled by students. So the students run this organization and they're in control of it. The students believe that the administration is attempting to take control or authority over this institution, and they have held protests against this. They've repeatedly asked the administration for permission to hold peaceful demonstrations, and the administration always comes up with a reason why they can't give them permission to hold those demonstrations.
And this is like normal student protests. The students are like, save the union. They've got little stickers. They go out and put up posters. This is nothing crazy.
They've got stickers. I don't know if you can see it, but save our union.
Very threatening sticker right there.
Very threatening. And the administration has responded by preventing them from holding demonstrations on campus. They've responded by tearing down their signs on camera. This is stuff caught on camera. The administration has been tearing down their signs saying, save our union.
We're not making any of this up. This is all real, by the way.
They do it under pretenses that are obviously attempting to further the interests of the institution and the administrators. So, when prospective students are coming to campus, they've torn down the signs and said, well, our sign policy that allows you to post these things up here, that's not applicable today. They've said you can't protest outside of a black tie fundraiser. And these are it's almost a caricature of what you would see as a censor. And it's amazing that the school has dug its heels in and has persisted in harassing students who are trying to criticize the administration.
So they get the first spot on our list. So next, let's go to Drexel. Sarah, Drexel alum, can we reveal that?
Yes.
And now you're about to tell us why they made our 10 worst list for free speech, although they produced you, who
they
a
did,
free speech advocate. So, maybe we can get, Drexel gets 1 point, but then like negative 1,000 for all the other stuff they did. So tell us why Drexel made our list this year.
Okay, so this all began in 2016 on Christmas Eve when Professor Chikarilla Lamar tweeted, "All I want for Christmas is white genocide." You may have heard about this tweet. It got a lot of media attention. He said it was meant to be a satirical tweet, mocking the concept of white genocide, which he called imaginary. Predictably, a lot of people were angry. There was a lot of, outraged tweets, many of which were directed at Drexel. And Drexel originally told the professor that they weren't going to punish him, they respected his free speech rights, so everything seemed fine, but that wasn't actually the case. They secretly launched an investigation, we wrote in, we said, we learned about this investigation, what are you doing? They actually chose to bar him from campus in October because they claimed that they were getting threats, that he couldn't be safe there, students weren't safe. We asked them for more information on it. They didn't provide any information about these threats. And it got to the point where Professor Ciccarello-Marr actually resigned this December because he said it was unsustainable for him to continue there, being under investigation for almost a year.
So, was there any resolution other than the resignation? It's just Drexel has been otherwise silent.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's clearly the only way this investigation was going to end, just by him leaving. So,
what was that quote that he, the quote that he wrote? Like, we're all one outrage mob away from.
Yeah, he said we're all a single outrage campaign away from having no rights at all. And you know, the past year has shown that. We've seen at a number of universities, professors get in trouble, get fired, be investigated because they tweeted something that a lot of people didn't like.
Even though objectively, when you look at the context and you look at what was actually said, definitely not a threat.
Yeah, no, like things that weren't threatening. People, you know, like to ignore context and they like to be angry about things. So yeah, we've seen that at Essex County College, University of Tampa, Trinity College. That's just a few from the long list.
Engage with these tweets, people, but like on more than a surface level, you know, try to figure out what people are saying. Have conversations. That's all we're saying. It would stop you from getting on the 10 worst list for free speech. Moving right along, I'll talk about Harvard, give my esteemed colleagues a break here. Harvard University is making our list for the fourth time, so I won't spend too long on them, but the big issue with Harvard this year was, what was a couple things? They started out with a blacklist policy that came out last year, a big freedom of association issue, basically saying that students who join off-campus single-gender associations, fancy way of saying fraternities and sororities, as well as the sort of storied Harvard men's final clubs, those students would not be allowed to captain on-campus sports teams. They wouldn't be allowed to get certain kinds of prestigious scholarships, like the Fulbright Scholarship, which I think if you're at Harvard, everyone has a Fulbright Scholarship, but not if you were in a fraternity or sorority. That was a joke, by the way. All of these things were basically working against all these students who wanted to associate off campus, and so FIRE was very critical of that. Then in mid-2017, commencement time, President Drew Faust had these great comments talking about a wild rumpus of ideas that she wanted to foster at Harvard, saying that she was basically a big proponent of freedom of speech. Then just a week later, there was a big controversy over admitted students passing offensive memes back and forth on Facebook and having their admission offers rescinded. So much for a wild rumpus. I guess you can have a wild rumpus as long as it's not too wild, according to Drew Faust. And then there was the Chelsea Manning debacle, where Chelsea Manning was offered a fellowship, but then the U.S. Department of Defense, I believe it was, the U.S. government said, we don't really like that you're offering this to Chelsea Manning, who was, you know, we had recently imprisoned. And Harvard basically immediately caved and said, okay, never mind, we won't, you know, engage in this sort of pedagogy that we thought was good. Whatever you say, U.S. government. So not another good year for Harvard.
Not rumpusy.
Not rumpusy at all. If you know, when you think of a rumpus, you think of Chelsea Manning. So that's what I will say. Okay, moving on. I think it's time to move on. What is next? Los Angeles Community College District. Not just the college, but the whole district. Marieke, tell us what went down.
So LACCD is on the list this year, probably just because of scale. LACCD is the biggest community college district in the country. And in California, the community college system is very large and very highly utilized. So this largest community college district in the country has a speech and demonstration policy applicable to all of its 9 campuses that declares them all to be non-public fora. And the only place that students or community members may express themselves on any of these campuses are in designated free speech areas. So each college has to...
And how big are those?
Well, we'll take the example of Pierce College, where where we have a case that we filed last year still ongoing. At Pierce, the free speech area is about the size of a couple of parking spots next to each other. It's about 600 square feet on a campus of over 400 acres. So we're talking about...
Sounds very free.
Yeah, it's very very free. We have like a very cool graphic that we put out at the time that we filed the lawsuit that was like, if Pierce campus was the size of a tennis court, the free speech area would be like the size of an iPhone sitting on the tennis court. So you
can go to any part of those 2 parking spaces. You can walk all around the parking space sized.
Yeah, and you know exactly where it is because they painted it with red and black paint into like a big rectangle. So it's it literally says free speech zone in, like on the ground. So you know when you're standing inside it, you know when you're standing outside. It's very clear.
Nothing says freedom like having to stand inside a red and black painted box.
Actually, the wonderful young man who's the plaintiff in our lawsuit, Kevin Shaw.
Such a cool guy, Kevin Shaw.
He's great. We like all adore him here at Fire. But there's a really awesome video that actually Chris and Aaron, who are taping this right now, put together about the case and about LACCD and some of these crazy free speech zones and crazy rules on some of the other campuses. And they have this great footage of Kevin like walking along inside, like just inside the free speech zone on Pierce's campus. And it's just totally ridiculous because he's like walking on one side of the line and there's nothing on the other side of nothing. There's just open space. But he's like, here's me in my box. So yeah,
we'll have to link that video so you can watch it.
Yeah, it's a very cool video. They did a great job on it. So anyway, yeah, it's LACCD is by sheer size
magnitude,
and
yes.
magnitude is on our list this year for its containment of over 150,000 of its students into free speech zones.
You know, it's really hard to draw lines in First Amendment jurisprudence and figuring out where free speech is and what unprotected speech isn't or is, but it's probably a bad idea to paint it on the ground.
Yeah, like literally draw
We're talking about drawing lines. Don't actually draw the line, you guys. Come on. Fordham. Let's talk about Fordham. I think that's you, Sarah. You want to tell us about Fordham? Okay.
So,
what's going on there?
So like Harvard, Fordham has found itself on the list multiple times. This is the second year in a row for the same exact thing as last year, which is pretty embarrassing.
Come on, you guys, get it together.
So this started in November 2016 when students attempted to form a Students for Justice in Palestine group. The student government approved them. They seemed to be, well on their way to becoming an approved student group. But the dean of students wrote in, overruled them, and said, I've decided that you can't be a recognized student group because of the Israel-Palestine debate leads to polarization and doesn't lead to dialogue. So he said that was his final decision, couldn't be overturned. So that's why they ended up on the list the first year. They ended up on the list this year because the students actually sued, and instead of admitting that they made a mistake and they should have recognized the group, Fordham is still fighting back. They were trying to get the lawsuit dismissed. Adam was there in court witnessing that. Do you want to?
Yeah, I went to the hearing to see the attorneys for the students and, more importantly, the attorneys for the school try to talk about, whether or not this lawsuit can move forward. And the legal standard here is looking at this private institution saying, was the decision to bar this group or to deny recognition of this group rationally based? And what Fordham is now saying is not just, well, there have been other chapters of SJP that have engaged in disruption, which was their previous excuse. Now they are saying, we would let you become a recognized group, but we don't like the name SJP. So if you chose another name, we would let you have the same organization. That is not remotely rational. It is incoherent.
Did they suggest any names?
I think the school has, or there's been a suggestion of a name, but the school still rejected it. I'm not sure on the details.
It just
there.
can't have the word Palestine in it?
The school objects to the group being connected to other chapters of SJP and the national organization. And the chapter's already said, look, we have this name because we want to associate ourselves with these groups and with this message, but that doesn't mean we're taking orders from a national organization. But apparently that is not enough for the school.
Very interesting. Yeah, maybe they could be like Students for Justice in Photography, but actually they care about Palestine instead, and it could just be like, it could be an asterisk. I don't know, just an idea. Let's talk about, since we're talking to you, Adam, let's talk about a couple more schools on the list. Berkeley Evergreen, why don't you tell us in whatever order you want to talk about them?
Yeah, they're kind of on the list for similar reasons.
Yes.
So at Evergreen, what happened was a biology professor there named Brett Weinstein, there was this tradition at Evergreen where on one day of the year, people of color would absent themselves from the campus to show, hey, this is what it's like when we're not here. We are important to this community. But in 2017, the people who were putting together this this protest decided that instead they would ask white people to leave the campus. So Brett Weinstein, a professor there, responded to an email about this and said, hey, I disagree with this tactic, and said, at the end of his message, he said, on a college campus, one's right to speak or to be must never be based on skin color. After that, people found out about this message and it turned into protests. Protests are good. Protests are a way to add more speech, to disagree with someone, and it is something that colleges should facilitate. But when they cross the line into violent conduct or into violence, you get into trouble, which is the problem that is most pronounced at Berkeley. So you may recall at Berkeley, Milo Yiannopoulos, who's kind of a provocateur, there were riots in response to the attempt to bring him in to speak there, and it resulted in the college essentially saying that because of the risk, he couldn't speak, and they had to cancel that appearance. After that, because there was so much national pressure on Berkeley has ultimately spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to secure the campus for other conservative speakers.
And they declared a free speech year, right? So that's what,
yes.
One of the reasons Berkeley's so interesting on our list is that it's not Berkeley administrators that are really causing many of the problems, I guess we could say.
In fact, it's often outsiders. So when you look at when I believe it was for the Free Speech Week that Milo Yiannopoulos was trying to put on there, which ultimately, I don't think it really happened to kind of filter or
a lot of people
out.
backed out of speaking at the Free Speech Week. Yeah.
But in the lead up to that, what you saw were a lot of outside groups saying, we're going to come to Berkeley to cause chaos. So it is not necessarily the students who are engaging in disruptive conduct or violence. Oftentimes it's outside groups. And that can create, security risks. So what Berkeley's done is they've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in order to, bring in outside security, bring in law enforcement from other agencies to be there to prepare for the possibility of violence. And that is, not a good sign for free speech in the country.
So despite administrators' best efforts, still not a good environment for free speech at Berkeley. Let's get things a little more lighthearted. Let's talk about jokes. If you want to tell a joke at, say, Albion College in Albion, Michigan, that sounds like something that would be totally normal to do, right? Like if you wanted to make a joke and have people maybe laugh at it or not laugh, as my jokes typically end up. At Albion, they take it a step further, right? Jokes aren't just jokes there.
So, on a lot of college campuses, white privilege is a major source of debate and contention. And so one student who's part of a conservative student group at Albion, he sent an email to other members in the group with some suggestions on how to combat arguments about white privilege. And he ended that email with a joke suggesting that his peers take the liberal tears from the idiot they just destroyed, use it to clean their gun, and then purchase ISIS hunting permits, which I think we can all agree that that's not actually a thing you can purchase, and everyone knows you can't actually purchase a hunting permit for ISIS. But to Albion's administrators, that apparently is not so clear. They started investigating him in September.
Antifa and ISIS
Yes.
hunting permits, yes.
Yes,
So,
the two of them.
both at the same time. They're in the same wooded area, allegedly, out in Michigan.
I haven't seen those ones, so I can't confirm.
Oh, boy.
Yes, so they started investigating him in September, notified him in November that he was charged with violating the policy against use of or threatened use of physical force or violence. I did not see that present in what was clearly a joking email. None of us did. So we sent a letter to Albion letting them know that, hey, you have free speech policies. You're not abiding by them here.
And also that ISIS hunting permits aren't a thing.
We
informed them in case they didn't know. Maybe they were just misinformed.
I mean, they can call and check.
They can, yeah. If it's not on Amazon, you can't buy it
Some
anywhere.
poor government employee.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Have to answer that phone call. But
We just have moose this year. Sorry to disappoint you.
So after that letter, they postponed the original planned November hearing, and then just kind of left the student in limbo for weeks about whether they were still keeping up the hearing, what was going to happen. And then when he left home for winter break in December, they sent him a letter saying, come back to campus this week, we're going to have your hearing, and if you don't show up, we'll hold it without you. Obviously,
Happy holidays.
Unacceptable. So he, spoke with administrators. He got them to push back the hearing to late January. It was a 4-hour hearing, which is absurd. And they promised him that he would find out within 2 weeks whether or not he would be punished. He still hasn't heard, so we're waiting on the outcome for that.
So we put him on the list. Next up is Northwestern. Marieke, you want to tell us what's going on there?
Sure. Northwestern is another school that's been on the list previously. I think it was on the list in 2016 for its 2015 antics.
With Laura Kipnis.
And also Al Streiger, but I will talk about why they were on the list previously for Laura Kipnis, because she is also the reason that they're on the list this year.
They will not quit trying to get after Laura Kipnis. Oh my goodness. Okay.
So in 2015, Northwestern launched a multi-month Title IX investigation of Professor Laura Kipnis for having written an article about kind of
The proliferation of Title IX investigations.
Well, first she wrote an article about attitudes about sex on campus, and then she was investigated. The investigation started over that. Then she wrote an article about being investigated under Title IX for
criticizing Title IX,
for writing the article, and then was investigated for that. And this went on for months. Eventually, she was it was dropped, and she was found not to have violated Title IX for writing articles. But because it was so concerning and such an overt threat to academic freedom, I think the community took it seriously. The university formed an ad hoc committee on academic freedom that actually came out with a report in February of this year that said, here are the steps that the university has taken to make sure that essentially a Laura Kipnis event doesn't happen again. And we think that if these rules had been in place in 2015, then this never would have happened. Well, a couple months later, Laura Kipnis is once again investigated under Title IX by Northwestern, this time for writing a book about being investigated under Title IX and her previous experience.
Fire should buy the movie rights right now, because you know this is going to happen. We're just going to take it to the next level.
I would like to play Laura Kipnis, please.
Yeah, that's Marieke as Laura Kipnis, yes.
So this time the investigation lasted about a month. She was once again exonerated of having violated Title IX, but in the course of this going on, Northwestern asked her to fill out a written submission of like 80 written questions, asking for all about her book, asking for source materials from her book, just really going after her book. Again, huge concern for the vitality of academic freedom at Northwestern.
Oh yeah, and a lot of times, I mean, that's why investigation we always say is punishment, because I mean she has to, filling out 80 questions and all these months and months and months of having this hanging over her head.
Being asked for her source materials for the book. I mean, it's just I think the threat to academic freedom is pretty obvious, but. So that is why Northwestern has made a reappearance this year, and we hope that by putting them on the list, we will encourage them to stop investigating Laura Kipnis under Title IX.
You're not going to win this one, you guys. Come on. Okay, last school before we get to the to 11, our Lifetime Censorship Award. The last school on the 10 worst list is Texas State University. Marieke, do you want to tell us about Texas State? What was going on there?
Sure. This was towards the end of last year, the independent newspaper at Texas State called the University Star published an op-ed entitled "Your DNA is an Abomination." And the subject of this op-ed by one of their columnists, it was the argument that race is a social construct that's used to oppress minorities, and his argument was that the notion of whiteness within this idea of the social construct should be destroyed, should be eliminated. So it was controversial, and there was an uproar on campus in response.
We got another outrage mob going. Not necessarily delving into the big ideas, but just saying your DNA is an abomination. What? Not my DNA. Anyway,
and it's like it was controversial, but it was a controversial op-ed. But in response to a controversial op-ed, the student body president threatened.
You're going to tell us that Texas State responded reasonably, right?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Student body president called for the defunding of the paper. There was petitions put out calling for the defunding of the paper, and in response, the head of the journalism department started taking steps to form a committee to review the newspaper's editorial process. The president came out and criticized the op-ed, which is totally within her right to do so. But then there's all this noise about we're going to form a committee,
defunding, prior review,
defunding, blah blah blah, and nobody from the university says anything. From the administration comes out and says, no, you can't defund them, or we are not going to examine their editorial process over the content of what they published. So FIRE wrote to Texas State along with NCAC and National Coalition Against Censorship, and we said, hey, could you commit to not defunding and not examining the editorial process of an independent paper? Could you commit to standing up for freedom of the press and these students' rights to publish what they want?
Doesn't seem like a crazy request.
And that doesn't seem like
one that might be even undergirded by things like laws, for example.
The university did, they responded very, very tepidly. They did say that, the paper wasn't defunded. Nobody said the paper was going to be defunded, and it's not going to be defunded. And they said, we were starting to take steps to set up a advisory committee to look at their editorial, but we're stopped. We're not doing that anymore, even though nobody said that publicly. So they backtracked. But that's
better than some of the schools on the list.
Yeah,
that's good.
It is,
At least they seemed kind of sheepish about it.
The reason that we left it on the list is because there was never that we put it on the list is because it was like these calls for defunding, this clear threat to this paper's editorial process. The school should have stood up. It should have stood up publicly and said, they printed something controversial. That's their right, and they cannot be punished, and their editorial process can't be tampered with. But the school never stood up for them, and as a result of kind of the public pressure and the calls for the editors of the paper to step down, and this op-ed columnist to step down and resign, blah blah blah, threaten funding if you don't, da da da. The result of all this is the Star apologized publicly for the op-ed, which is, again, it's their right to make whatever statements they want to. They parted ways with the op-ed columnist. They said we'll review our own editorial process. We promise. It's like
the whole point of op-eds is just to be a little controversial, right? I mean, otherwise no one would read the opinion pages.
Well, I mean, you can say it's an op-ed. You say what you want. It's the independent press. So the whole situation, even though the school kind of backed down behind the scenes, is just kind of this shrinking, chilling feeling that remains over. That remains. There's kind of like a pall, like a.
What can you really say at
cloud.
Texas State? Yeah, that's
a sad cloud over this process.
It's interesting because the university a couple weeks later held a Senate panel at the university about the importance of free speech on campus, and they couldn't take the easiest step of saying, yes, our students have First Amendment rights, and no, we're not going to let the student government defund the independent press. I mean, it's interesting.
Oh. Take a stand for the press, man.
Maybe there's hope for 2019. But so we've gotten through if that wasn't bad enough, we said we've got an extra treat for you this year. Our Lifetime Achievement Award when it comes to censorship goes to, we were going to put DePaul University on the list again this year, but then we thought they need something special because they keep showing up on our list year after year after year after year. Adam, do you want to give us a little overview of?
How much time do we have?
I know. DePaul has been censoring students in a variety of ways, in a variety of groups, with no real regard for ideology, I guess, except they find.
Everybody's controversial.
Everybody's controversial at DePaul, largest Catholic institution in the U.S., private school, but they promise free speech. What are some of the more egregious things that DePaul has done? Give us greatest hits.
They've got an issue with security fees, which is where the problem with security fees is that if you bring in a controversial speaker and an institution or the government says, okay, you can allow this person to speak here, but we're going to charge you money to deal with the protesters outside or inside the event or something along those lines, it runs up the cost of the group to bring in a controversial speaker or a speaker who isn't controversial.
It's basically a free speech tax.
Yeah.
Right? And free speech, not fee speech, as we have said in the past.
It gives an incentive to be disruptive, because if you are opposed to a particular group bringing in controversial speakers, it shows that you can be disruptive, and it's going to cost that group more money to bring them in. So DePaul's done this routinely. So they, for example, when Milo Yiannopoulos appeared at the invitation, I believe, of the college Republicans there, the school required them to pay for security officers there. And then those officers basically stood by while people did disrupt the event. And then, because they're playing very even-handedly here, DePaul also required the DePaul socialists to pay a security fee in order to hear a guy talk about Marx. And he's the author of a textbook. This isn't exactly a controversial discussion, yet here is a university requiring students to pay for security to stand there and watch them talk about Marx. So it's insult to injury. Not only are you required to have officers there to watch you have this discussion, but you got to pay for it too. And DePaul's also had, so for the most recent thing, for example, is that DePaul had, or conservatives at DePaul had a speaker come in to talk about gay rights in Islamic countries and I believe Russia. And to promote this event, they wanted to put up signs that said "Gay Lives Matter." DePaul required the students to submit these posters in advance to an administrator who reviewed them and said, well, you're basically ripping off some other movement's message, So therefore, we don't want you to be able to do that. You can't distribute these posters.
And this is this is just the most recent stuff. There's been, this has been over a decade, right? I'm looking at this list, 2005, DePaul refuses to allow posters criticizing Professor Ward Churchill, calling them propaganda. 2006, they charge a student group with harassment for holding an event satirizing affirmative action. 2010, an organization criticizing marijuana laws denied recognition. 2013, conduct violations for students regarding a pro-life display on campus. So this is like year after year after year with no real regard to, it's not like they're just targeting conservatives. They're not just targeting socialists and marijuana law
They're targeting anything
students.
controversial. So, if you bring in a controversial speaker, if you put up a controversial poster, if you, have views that are contrary to the administration's views, it's controversial and it won't be allowed. And that is not at all consistent with saying that we are an institution that protects freedom of speech. You can't have it both ways.
And you can't get an education without freedom of speech. So we will keep looking at public and private colleges. We'll keep making our 10 worst lists year after year. We have high hopes for next year. Maybe some of the schools that we identified this year will remedy their censorious ways and listen to us. We are always here to help. You can help too. Go over to thefire.org. We have myriad resources on there. You can contact your school. You can look up one of these schools or your school, see there if they have speech codes that censor free speech. You can look at resources for students, for faculty. We have a cool new student activism portal that you can use where you can just go online and click a few buttons and reach out to your school directly and say, we don't like what you're doing with free speech. So any other closing remarks from you guys? Do you have high hopes for for schools on this list? Not so much for DePaul, but maybe the other ones can turn it around. I think that's it for us.
It's a new year.
It's a new, it's a new year.
There's always hope.
We have high hopes. Every year I think I can't see weirder, and then the next year happens, and here we are. So until next time, thanks for joining us for Fireside Chats, and we'll see you again. Bye-bye.